The night shift at the Interstellar Embassy was always quiet. Too quiet, some might say. But David Chen didn't mind. He'd been cleaning these massive halls for 3 years now, and he'd grown to love the silence. There was something peaceful about pushing his mop across the polished floors while the rest of the city slept outside. David took pride in his work. Sure, he was just a janitor, but he treated this place like it was his own home. Every window sparkled. Every corridor gleamed. Even though most of the building sat empty these days, he never cut corners. His mother had taught him that long ago: if you're going to do something, do it right. Doesn't matter if anyone's watching or not. The embassy used to be packed with visitors from other worlds. Aliens of all kinds walked these halls just 7 years ago. There were diplomats, traders, scientists, and peacekeepers from across the galaxy. David had seen the old photos on the walls. Back then, this place buzzed with life and energy. Different languages, different cultures, all coming together under one roof. But then everything changed. The Great Treaty got signed, and most of the alien species packed up and left Earth. They went back to their home planets, their home systems. The building that once held hundreds now held just a skeleton crew of human staff. Most of them worked during the day. David had the whole place to himself at night. He didn't mind being alone. Actually, he preferred it. During his shift, he could think. He could listen to music through his earbuds. He could take his time and make sure everything was perfect. The day staff rushed through their work, always in a hurry. But David? He believed every corner deserved attention. Every surface deserved care. Tonight started like any other Tuesday. David clocked in at 11 p.m., changed into his work uniform, and grabbed his supply cart. He started on the ground floor as always, working his way through the offices and conference rooms. The embassy was massive. 12 floors of diplomatic history and interstellar hope. By 1 in the morning, he'd made it to the grand atrium. This was his favorite part of the building. The ceiling stretched up 5 stories high, all glass and steel, designed to make visitors feel welcome no matter what planet they came from. During the day, sunlight poured through the dome. At night, you could see the stars. David filled his mop bucket, added just the right amount of cleaner, not too much, that was wasteful, and started on the marble floors. The atrium was enormous, but he'd perfected his technique over the years. Long, smooth strokes, overlapping patterns, no streaks, no spots. He was about halfway across when something strange happened. The lights flickered. Just once, but enough to make him look up. Then every single alarm in the building went silent. Not like they were turned off, they just stopped mid-beep. The emergency lights, the security panels, the soft hum of the ventilation system, everything went quiet. David stood still, mop in hand, listening. His heart started beating faster. In 3 years of night shifts, this had never happened before. The silence was so complete he could hear his own breathing. Then came a sound from above, a deep, rumbling vibration that made the water in his bucket ripple. David looked up at the glass dome and felt his stomach drop. The panels were moving. The entire dome was retracting, pulling back in sections to reveal the night sky. Nobody had opened that dome in 7 years. He knew because he'd asked about it during training. The mechanism still worked, they'd told him, but it was only for official arrivals, important visitors from other worlds. The kind that hadn't come around since the treaty. The rumbling grew louder. David could see lights now, bright and pulsing, descending from the darkness above. A ship, a massive ship, easily the size of a city block, lowering itself through the opening with impossible grace. The wind from its engines whipped around the atrium, sending his bucket skittering across the floor. David should have run. Every instinct screamed at him to get out, call security, hide somewhere safe. But his feet wouldn't move. He stood there in the center of the atrium, still holding his mop, watching as this enormous vessel settled onto the landing platform with barely a sound. The ship was beautiful in a terrifying way. Its hull shimmered with colors David had never seen before, like oil on water but alive, shifting and flowing. Symbols glowed along its sides, writing from a language he didn't understand. The whole thing hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. For a moment, nothing happened. The ship just sat there, silent and waiting. David's hands were shaking now. He tightened his grip on the mop handle like it might protect him somehow. Then a door appeared in the ship's side. Or maybe it had always been there and he just couldn't see it. A ramp extended downward, touching the platform with a soft metallic ring. Lights blazed from inside the ship so bright David had to squint. Figures emerged from the light. Tall figures, very tall. They moved with purpose, their footsteps echoing across the atrium. As they came closer, stepping off the ship and onto the embassy floor, David could finally see them clearly. They were soldiers, or guards, or something like that. Each one stood at least 7 feet tall, covered in armor that seemed to be made of living metal. It moved with them, adjusted to their bodies, glowed with soft blue light. They carried weapons David recognized from the old training videos, energy staffs that could stun or worse. The guards fanned out in formation, professional and precise. They were protecting someone. And then she appeared. David forgot how to breathe. The alien woman who walked down that ramp was the most striking being he'd ever seen. She had to be close to 8 feet tall, moving with a grace that made her seem like she was floating rather than walking. Her skin was a deep blue, almost purple in the atrium lights, and covered in patterns that glowed softly, like someone had drawn constellations across her body. She wore robes that shifted colors as she moved, and something that might have been a crown, though it looked more like light than metal. Her face was humanoid but not human. Larger eyes, higher cheekbones, a presence that filled the entire space. David knew who she was. He'd seen her picture on the walls, in the historical displays, in the old news footage they sometimes played in the break room. Queen Ziraeth of the Calrothian Empire. She'd been Earth's most important ally during the First Contact years. She'd lived in this very building for almost 2 years, working on the treaty that would bring peace between Earth and the outer systems. And then, 7 years ago, she'd left. An emergency recall, they said. Her people needed her. She'd promised to return, but years passed and she never did. Most people figured she'd forgotten about Earth. Maybe she'd moved on to more important things. Maybe Earth just wasn't worth her time anymore. But here she was, standing in the atrium, and she was staring right at David. He watched her freeze mid-step. One foot still raised, her whole body going perfectly still. Her guards noticed and immediately tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. They scanned the area, looking for threats, trying to figure out what had alarmed their queen, but she wasn't alarmed. Her expression was something else entirely. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Her glowing eyes were locked on David, standing there in his janitor uniform with his mop in hand, a puddle of soapy water spreading around his feet. The moment stretched out forever. David knew he should do something, bow, run, speak, anything, but his brain had stopped working. He was just a janitor, just a guy who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. And here was a queen from another world frozen in place because of him. Finally, his training kicked in. During orientation, they'd taught all the staff basic protocols for alien visitors. Show respect. Don't make sudden movements. If you don't know what to do, just be polite. David slowly set down his mop, making sure the movement was gentle and clear. Then he straightened up and gave a small, respectful nod. The kind you'd give to someone important. The queen's expression shifted. Her eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her guards, then back at David. She said something in a language that sounded like music and thunder at the same time. One of her guards stepped forward, tapping something on his wrist. A small device floated up, hovering between them. When the queen spoke again, the device translated her words into English. Her voice was deep and resonant, but there was something gentle in it, too. "You work here?" David's mouth felt dry. "Yes, Your Majesty." I'm the night custodian. How long?" 3 years, ma'am." Something flickered across her face. Relief, sadness? David couldn't tell. The queen stood there for another long moment, just looking at him. Her guards were getting restless, clearly uncomfortable with how exposed she was. But she didn't seem worried at all. Finally, she raised one hand, a gesture that made her guards immediately step back. She wanted space. She walked toward David slowly, her robes flowing behind her. Up close, she was even more impressive. He had to crane his neck just to meet her eyes. "The garden," she said quietly. "The garden on the 3rd floor. Does it still exist?" David blinked in surprise. Of all the questions an alien queen might ask after returning to Earth after 7 years, he hadn't expected that one. The garden on the 3rd floor? Most people didn't even know the embassy had a garden. It was tucked away in a corner of the building, behind the old conference rooms nobody used anymore. "Yes," David said slowly. "Yes, it's still there." The queen's eyes closed for a moment like she'd just heard the best news of her life. When she opened them again, there was something vulnerable in her expression. Something almost human. "Is it? How is it? The plants, are they alive?" David felt a strange mix of pride and nervousness. They're doing pretty well, actually. I've been taking care of them. The queen went very still. Her guards exchanged confused glances. One of them stepped forward and spoke in their musical language. The translator picked it up. Your Majesty, we should secure the building first. Establish a perimeter. Follow protocol. But the queen waved him off. She was still staring at David like he'd just said something impossible. You've been taking care of them? The plants in the garden? Yes, ma'am. I try. They're not exactly normal plants, so it took some learning, but show me. It wasn't a request. The queen's voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. But there was also something desperate in it. Please, show me the garden now. David looked at the guards, who looked deeply unhappy about this change in plans, but they weren't going to argue with their queen. He grabbed his keycard from his belt. It's up on the 3rd floor. We can take the elevator. The queen gestured for him to lead the way. Her guards formed up around them as David walked toward the elevator bank, his wet shoes squeaking on the marble floor. He'd just been mopping that floor. Now he was tracking footprints across it. His supervisor would have given him an earful. The elevator ride was the most awkward 2 minutes of David's life. He stood in the corner, very aware of how much space the queen and her 4 guards took up. They barely all fit in the car. The queen kept staring at him with those strange, glowing eyes. He focused on watching the floor numbers tick upward. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, David led them down a corridor that hadn't seen much traffic in years. The carpet was faded, the walls needed repainting. Budget cuts meant this part of the building got minimal maintenance. David did what he could, but it was a lot of space for one person to cover. They reached a door at the end of the hall. It looked like just another office door, but David's keycard made it click open. It's through here, he said quietly. The room beyond was a disappointment at first glance. Old furniture covered with sheets, filing cabinets that probably hadn't been opened in a decade, dusty windows that looked out over the city. But there was another door on the far side, and that one led to a small staircase going up. David climbed the stairs with the queen right behind him. Her guards had to duck to fit in the narrow space. At the top was a final door, this one more like a hatch. David pushed it open and suddenly they were on a small rooftop terrace that nobody knew about. The garden wasn't big, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. Surrounded by the walls of the taller buildings around it, it would have been easy to miss from the ground or even from the air. But up here under the stars it was like a secret world, and it was alive. So very alive, strange plants filled every available space. Some had leaves that shimmered in the darkness, giving off their own soft light. Others had flowers that seemed too delicate to exist, petals that moved even though there was no wind. A few had structures that looked like they belonged underwater rather than on land, flowing, waving, impossibly beautiful. In the center of the garden, taking up most of the space, were the moonflowers. That's what David called them anyway. He didn't know their real name. They grew on tall stalks, maybe 5 feet high, and each flower was the size of a dinner plate. The petals were translucent, glowing with a soft blue-white light that made the whole garden feel magical. They swayed gently, and occasionally one would pulse brighter for a moment before dimming again. The queen made a sound that the translator couldn't quite capture. It was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She moved past David like he wasn't there, walking into the garden with her hands reaching out to touch the flowers. When her fingers brushed the petals, they pulsed brighter, responding to her presence. She knelt down right there on the ground, her royal robes spreading around her. She cradled one of the moonflowers in both hands so gently it might break. Her eyes were closed and her shoulders were shaking. David stood by the door, not sure what to do. The guards looked just as confused as he felt. They'd clearly never seen their queen like this. After a long moment, the queen spoke without opening her eyes. How? These should not survive here. They need specific conditions: light, temperature, humidity. Earth's atmosphere is wrong for them. They should have died within weeks. David shifted his weight nervously. Well, it took some figuring out. When I first found this place, about 3 years back, most of the plants were dead or dying. The moonflowers, that's what I call them, they were in bad shape. All brown and wilted. I almost gave up on them. The queen opened her eyes and looked at him. But you didn't. No, ma'am. See, I found some old maintenance logs in the basement. The guy who had my job before me, he'd written notes about this garden. He mentioned the Queen's flowers and how important they were. I figured, I don't know, I figured if they were important enough for someone to write about, they were important enough to try to save. He walked into the garden, careful not to step on any plants. I started researching, hit the library, looked up stuff online, even contacted a professor at the university who studied alien plant life. She thought I was crazy at first, but when I sent her pictures, she got real interested. David knelt beside one of the other plants, a fern-like thing with silver fronds. Turns out these plants need a different kind of light than what we have naturally, so I installed some special LED panels. He pointed up at the edges of the terrace where David had rigged lights that most people wouldn't notice. They cycle through different colors at specific times, matching what the professor said would be close to your planet's sun. The Queen was watching him intently now. David kept talking, nervous energy making the words spill out. The temperature was easier. I sealed up the gaps in the terrace walls, added some insulation. Built basically a greenhouse without the glass. And for humidity, I set up a misting system on a timer. It goes off 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night. Took me 6 months to get it all working right. He stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. The moonflowers were the hardest. They weren't responding to anything I tried. Then I read about how some plants need, I don't know how to explain it. Emotional energy? Sound vibrations? Something like that. So I started talking to them during my rounds. Felt stupid at first, but they seemed to like it. One of the guards made a noise that might have been a suppressed laugh. David felt his face heat up. I know it sounds weird, but it worked. After a couple months, they started blooming again. Been healthy ever since. The Queen was quiet for a long time. She stood slowly, her movements careful, like she was in a dream and didn't want to wake up. She walked around the garden, touching each plant gently, checking the leaves and flowers. David noticed tears running down her face, catching the light from the moonflowers. "You didn't know if I would return," she said finally. "No, ma'am. You didn't know these flowers meant anything to me personally?" "No, ma'am. Just knew they were called the Queen's flowers in the logs. And yet you spent 3 years maintaining this garden, learning about plants from my world, installing equipment, talking to flowers in the middle of the night." She turned to face him. Why? David thought about that. He'd asked himself the same question plenty of times, especially during the frustrating months when nothing seemed to work. I guess because they deserved it. The flowers, I mean, they were alive. They were trying to survive in a place that wasn't their home. Seemed wrong to just let them die because nobody was around to care for them anymore. He shrugged. "And maybe I hoped you'd come back someday. I didn't know you, not really. But the maintenance logs talked about how you'd come up here every day, how you'd spend hours just sitting with these plants, someone who cared that much about a garden. I figured you must be a good person. Seemed like good people deserved to come home to something living instead of something dead." The Queen covered her face with her hands. Her guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to handle their leader crying. After a moment, she lowered her hands and looked at David with an expression he couldn't quite read. "These flowers," she said quietly, "are from my mother's garden. On Calroth Prime, our home world." David felt something heavy settle in his chest. The way the Queen said mother's garden told him everything he needed to know. There was pain in those words. Loss. The kind that doesn't go away. The Queen walked to a small bench at the edge of the garden. David had repaired it last year, replacing the rotten boards with new wood and repainting it. She sat down, and despite her size, she looked small somehow. Tired. She gestured for David to sit beside her. He did, very aware of how strange the situation was. A janitor and an alien queen, sitting together in a secret garden at 2 a.m. Her guards maintained their positions at the door, giving them space but staying alert. The translator device floated closer, ready to catch every word. "My mother loved gardens," the Queen said, staring at the moonflowers. "She said they were proof that beauty could exist anywhere if you gave it the right care. Our palace had gardens on every level, thousands of plants from across our system. But her favorite was always the moonflower garden. She planted it herself when she was young, before she became queen." The Queen touched one of the flowers nearby. It pulsed in response, like it recognized her. "These specific flowers are clones of her original plants. When I came to Earth as an ambassador, I brought cuttings with me. I wanted I needed something to remind me of home during the difficult negotiations. Something living and beautiful when everything felt complicated and political. David listened quietly. He'd learned long ago that sometimes people just needed someone to listen, not someone to talk. I would come up here every day, the Queen continued, morning and evening. Sometimes in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, I'd sit with these flowers and think about my mother, about home, about whether what we were doing here would actually matter in the long run. She smiled, though it looked sad. The other ambassadors thought I was strange. They spent their free time in meetings or studying human culture. But I needed this place, this quiet, these flowers that asked nothing of me except care. The moonflowers swayed gently around them. David noticed they seemed brighter now, like they were happy to have her back. Then the war started, the Queen said, her voice dropping lower. Not here. Out there in the outer systems, a conflict that had been brewing for decades finally exploded. The Calrothian Empire was right in the middle of it. My people needed their queen. The council sent a ship for me with orders to return immediately. She closed her eyes. I had 2 hours to pack. 2 hours to leave everything I'd built here. The treaty wasn't quite finished. There were still negotiations to complete, agreements to refine. But none of that mattered anymore. My people were dying. I had to go. I remember thinking about these flowers as I packed. I told myself I'd be back in a few weeks, a month at most. We'd handle the immediate crisis, I'd return to Earth, and we'd finish the treaty properly. So I left them here. Left them alive and healthy, expecting to see them again soon. The Queen opened her eyes, looking at David. The war didn't last weeks. It lasted 7 years. 7 years of fighting and death and political maneuvering. 7 years of watching my people suffer. And through all of it, I thought about this garden. About Earth. About promises I'd made that I couldn't keep. Her voice cracked slightly. My mother died in the 3rd year of the war. A raid on the capital city. She was helping evacuate civilians when the building collapsed. They tell me she didn't suffer, but I don't know if that's true or just something people say. David felt his throat tighten. I'm sorry, he said quietly. When she died, I thought about these flowers, these pieces of her garden, light years away on an alien world. I was certain they were dead by then. How could they not be? No one on Earth knew how to care for them. No one would even know they were important. They were probably dried out, composted, thrown away years ago. The Queen laughed, but it was a bitter sound. It almost made it worse, knowing that the last pieces of my mother's garden were dying on Earth while I couldn't leave my people. Like I was losing her all over again, losing both her and this place I'd grown to love. She turned to face David fully. The war ended 6 months ago. Finally. It took us this long to stabilize things enough that I could leave. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back to Earth. I didn't send messages ahead. Part of me was afraid to find out what had happened to this place, to the embassy, to the treaty we'd worked so hard on. I expected to find everything changed. I expected the embassy to be repurposed, the gardens destroyed, any trace of my time here erased. That's what makes sense, isn't it? 7 years is a long time. People move on. Buildings get renovated. Life continues. The Queen gestured at the thriving garden around them. But this is impossible. These flowers should be dead. That's what I told myself. That's what I'd accepted. And yet here you are, a human I've never met, telling me you've spent 3 years keeping my mother's garden alive. She stood up and walked back to the moonflowers, kneeling beside them again. Do you understand what this means to me? You kept the last piece of my mother alive. Not because you had to, not because anyone asked you to, not for any reward or recognition. You did it because you thought it was the right thing to do. David shifted uncomfortably. I really didn't do much. Just some lights and water and— You did everything, the Queen interrupted. She turned to look at him and her eyes were fierce now. You gave your time, your effort, your care to something that meant nothing to you personally. You researched alien biology. You installed equipment. You talked to flowers that couldn't talk back. You did all of this for 3 years without knowing if it mattered. She stood and walked back to him. I have advisors who can tell me about Earth's economy. Analysts who can report on political stability. Scientists who can measure your planet's resources. But none of them can measure this. None of their reports can capture what you represent. David felt overwhelmed. This was way beyond anything he'd signed up for when he took the janitor job. Your Majesty, I'm just a guy who cleans floors. I'm not trying to represent anything. But you do, she said firmly, whether you mean to or not. I asked you why you maintained this garden and you said it was because the flowers deserved it. Because they were alive and trying to survive far from home. Because you hoped good people deserved to come home to living things rather than dead ones. The Queen looked around the garden, at all the thriving plants that shouldn't exist. That kind of thinking. That kind of care for things that give you nothing in return. That's rare, anywhere in the galaxy, and I've been to many worlds. She was quiet for a moment, and David could see her thinking hard about something. The guards at the door were watching carefully, clearly concerned about how long they'd been up here. One of them spoke up in their language. The translator caught it. Your Majesty, we should return to the ship. Security protocols require... The Queen silenced him with a gesture. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow we'll follow all the protocols. Tonight I'm staying here. The guard looked horrified. Your Majesty, the embassy hasn't been secured. We don't have a proper detail. The accommodations aren't prepared, then prepare them. Her voice carried absolute authority. I'm not leaving this building tonight. Clear whatever rooms you need. Do whatever security sweeps you require, but I'm staying. The guards exchanged worried looks but didn't argue further. They began speaking rapidly to each other, probably coordinating with their ship. The Queen turned back to David. I need to understand something. I need to see what Earth has become in my absence. And I think you might be able to show me that better than any official briefing. David blinked. Me? Your Majesty, I really don't know anything about politics, or I don't want politics. The Queen sat back down on the bench. I want truth. I want to understand what kind of world maintains gardens for absent queens. What kind of people care for things that can't care for them back. She looked tired suddenly, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. I have to decide something very important in the coming days. Something that will affect both our worlds. And before I make that decision, I need to remember why I believed in Earth in the first place. The moonflowers pulsed brighter, like they were agreeing with her, or maybe they were just happy she was home. Over the next few nights, something unexpected happened. The Queen kept coming back to the garden and David kept showing up for his regular shift. Somehow, despite the massive differences between them, alien and human, royalty and janitor, they fell into an easy rhythm. David would arrive at 11, change into his work clothes, and start his rounds. Around midnight, the Queen would appear on the third floor, usually alone, though her guards were never far away. She'd ask them to give her space, and they reluctantly agreed, though David could always spot at least two of them watching from the shadows. At first, David wasn't sure what to do. How do you talk to an alien queen? What do you say? But the Queen made it easy. She'd ask him about his work, about the building, about his life, simple questions that led to long conversations while he watered plants or she helped him organize the supply closets. Yes, she helped him clean. An alien queen helping him sort mops and dust shelves. Her guards looked like they might have heart attacks the first time they saw her carrying a bucket. But she seemed to enjoy the simple work. She told him it reminded her of gardening, repetitive, meditative, productive. They talked about everything and nothing. David learned that Calrothian cities were built vertically, stretching miles into the sky. That their oceans were purple and their seasons lasted 3 times longer than Earth's. That the Queen had 2 younger brothers who drove her crazy, but whom she loved fiercely. In return, he told her about growing up in a small apartment with his mother and grandmother, about how his mom had worked 3 jobs to put him through school, about how he'd planned to be an engineer but life had other plans when his mom got sick. He'd dropped out to take care of her, and after she passed he'd never quite made it back. The Queen listened to all of it without judgment. She didn't offer empty sympathy or tell him everything happens for a reason. She just listened, really listened in a way that made David feel heard. On the 3rd night, she brought him tea from her ship. It was strange stuff, purple liquid that tasted like honey and something herbal he couldn't identify. It was surprisingly good. They sat in the garden drinking tea and watching the moonflowers sway. Can I ask you something? David said. Why did you really come back to Earth? I mean, I'm glad you did, but 7 years is a long time. Why now? The Queen was quiet for a moment, cupping the warm mug in her hands. The war changed many things. Our economy, our alliances, our place in the galactic community. Before the war, Earth was valuable to us, a strategic partner, a new perspective, a world full of potential. And now? David asked. Now my advisors say Earth is struggling, that your economy hasn't recovered from the post-treaty period, that you've made limited technological progress, that maintaining the alliance costs more resources than it returns. She looked at him. They say Earth has become a bad investment. David felt a knot form in his stomach. So you came back to, what, end things officially? I came back to assess the situation, the Queen said carefully. The Galactic Council wants a report on whether to continue Earth's alliance or let it expire. The decision affects trade agreements, technology sharing, defense pacts. It's not a small thing. But you don't think it's that simple, David said. It wasn't a question. No, I don't. When I knew Earth before, I saw potential that my advisors' reports couldn't measure. I saw creativity, resilience, compassion. I saw a species that had just learned they weren't alone in the universe, and instead of falling apart, you tried to understand, to learn, to build bridges. She set down her mug. But 7 years is a long time, like you said. Maybe that potential has faded. Maybe my advisors are right and I'm being sentimental. That's why I need to see for myself. Talk to people. Understand what Earth has become. David thought about that. And I'm supposed to help with that? Your Majesty, I don't know if I'm the best example. I mean, I clean floors for a living. I'm not exactly Earth's finest representative. The Queen smiled. That's exactly why you're perfect. My advisors will show me statistics and charts. Politicians will tell me what they think I want to hear. But you'll show me the truth even if you don't realize it. Over the following nights, David did exactly that, though he didn't really understand how. He just kept doing his job while the Queen watched and asked questions. Why did he clean areas nobody ever used? Because they deserved to be clean. Why did he take care of the memorial plaques in the main hall, polishing them weekly even though they'd tarnished again? Because the names on those plaques were important. People who'd worked for peace between worlds. They deserved to be remembered properly. The Queen met other staff members too. The day shift manager, who'd kept the embassy running on a shrinking budget for 5 years. The security guard who worked double shifts because they were understaffed, but refused to let standards slip. The archivist who digitized thousands of treaty documents in her spare time because she believed the history mattered. One night, David brought the Queen to the basement archives. He showed her his maintenance logs, years of daily entries recording every repair, every improvement, every problem solved. She read through them, page after page, seeing the care and attention in every note. You documented everything, she said, surprised. My mom taught me that. She said if you're going to do work worth doing, keep a record. Respect the people who'll come after you by showing them what you did and why. The Queen turned to a specific entry. This says you fixed the heating system in Sector C. That's not custodial work. David shrugged. It was broken and we couldn't afford to call anyone. I watched some videos online, figured it out. Same with the electrical panel on floor 6 and the plumbing issue in the East Wing. When budgets are tight, you do what needs doing. But that's not your job, the Queen said. No, ma'am. But it needed to be done and I could do it, so I did. She looked at him for a long moment. You really don't see it, do you? What you represent? I represent a guy who fixes stuff, David said, confused. You represent hope, the Queen said quietly. Hope that people will do the right thing even when it's not required. Hope that care and quality matter even when nobody's watching. Hope that promises made are promises kept, even if the person who made them never returns. She closed the logbook gently. My advisors say Earth is a failing investment, but they're measuring the wrong things. They count trade deficits and technology gaps. They don't count this. She gestured at the logs, at the carefully maintained building around them, at the garden far above. They don't count people who maintain gardens for 7 years on the chance that it might matter to someone someday. They don't count workers who expand their skills because the work needs doing. They don't count communities that keep trying even when resources are scarce. The Queen stood up, and David could see determination settling over her like a cloak. I have to present my findings to the Council soon. They'll want data, numbers, projections, and I'll give them those things. But I'll also tell them about a janitor who taught me something I'd forgotten during 7 years of war. What's that? David asked. That the measure of a civilization isn't found in its victories or wealth. It's found in what its people choose to do when no one is forcing them. When there's no reward. When it would be easier to walk away. She smiled. It's found in maintained gardens and polished memorial plaques and heating systems, fixed by people who care more about doing good work than doing only required work. David felt his face heat up. Your Majesty, you just kept my mother's garden alive, the Queen interrupted gently. Don't diminish that. Don't diminish yourself. What you did matters, maybe more than you'll ever know. But the next night, when David arrived for his shift, there were more people in the embassy than he'd seen in years. Important-looking people with fancy suits and serious expressions. The day shift manager pulled him aside with a worried look. The Queen's advisors are here, she said quietly. They're not happy about her spending time with us instead of following proper protocols. I heard them talking about expediting the assessment, about concluding the report early. David felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means they want to wrap this up fast and get out of here. And based on the arguments I overheard, their recommendation isn't going to be good for Earth. That night, David found the Queen in the garden, but she wasn't alone. 3 of her advisors were with her, tall, imposing figures who made the space feel smaller. They were speaking rapidly in their language, and even without translation, David could tell it was an argument. When they noticed him, one of the advisors said something sharp. The Queen responded firmly, gesturing for David to come forward. The translator device activated. This is inappropriate, Your Majesty, the advisor was saying. You cannot base policy decisions on personal sentimentality. We have data. We have projections. We have clear evidence that Earth is not a viable long-term partner. And what does your data say about this? The Queen gestured at the thriving garden around them. The advisor looked annoyed. It says someone maintained plants, so what? One individual's actions don't represent an entire planet, don't they? The Queen countered. Isn't that exactly what we're supposed to assess? The character of a species? Their values? Another advisor stepped forward. Character doesn't pay for trade routes. Values don't. The third advisor spoke up, his voice cold and analytical. If I may be direct, Your Majesty, we've conducted thorough assessments. Earth's technological advancement has stagnated. Their economic output is below projections. Their political systems are fragmented. By every measurable standard, this alliance drains resources without adequate return. David stood at the edge of the garden, feeling completely out of place. These were discussions way beyond his understanding. Interstellar politics, economic analyses, trade projections. What did he know about any of that? He was just a janitor who liked plants. But the Queen turned to him. David, these are my senior advisors. They've been reviewing Earth's status for weeks now, analyzing everything from military capability to cultural exports. They believe the alliance should be terminated. One of the advisors, a tall woman with sharp features, looked at David like he was something stuck to her shoe. Your Majesty, with respect, why is this human here? These discussions are classified. Because, the Queen said calmly, he represents something your data cannot measure. One janitor. The woman's tone was dismissive. Your Majesty, I could find dedicated workers on any planet in the Empire. Individual competence is not a basis for planetary policy. The Queen walked to the moonflowers, touching their glowing petals gently. Tell me something. In all your analysis of Earth, did you measure compassion? Did you quantify dedication? Did your models account for people who keep promises nobody asked them to make? The first advisor sighed. Your Majesty, you're being sentimental. Yes, this human maintained your garden, that's admirable. But it doesn't change the fundamental economic realities. Economic realities, the Queen repeated softly. She turned to face her advisors. Do you know why I planted this garden 7 years ago? It wasn't decoration, it was a test. The advisors exchanged glances. David felt just as confused as they looked. A test of what? The woman asked. Of whether this alliance could survive my absence. Whether humans valued what we built together enough to maintain it without supervision, without immediate benefit, without knowing if it would ever matter. The Queen gestured at the thriving plants. I left these flowers expecting them to die. I thought if humans are truly ready for galactic partnership, someone would notice them. Someone would care. But I didn't expect much. Most species wouldn't bother. She walked toward David. But not only did someone notice, they spent 3 years learning alien biology, installing specialized equipment, researching atmospheric requirements, all for a garden that served no practical purpose. A garden for a queen who might never return. The first advisor frowned. That's still just one individual's choice. Is it? The queen challenged. David, who installed the lights in this garden? David blinked at the sudden question. Mostly me. But Jake from maintenance helped with the electrical work. He didn't have to, did it on his lunch breaks. And the research you mentioned? Professor Lou at the university. She spent months helping me figure out the light cycles and nutrient requirements. Wouldn't take any payment. Said preserving alien plant species was valuable for its own sake. The specialized soil and nutrients? The garden supply store on 5th Street. When I explained what I was trying to do, the owner ordered special materials. Cost him more than he charged me, but he said it was worth supporting. The queen looked at her advisors. You see, not one person, a community, multiple humans, none of whom had any obligation or expectation of reward, all contributing to maintain something that meant nothing to them personally. The woman advisor wasn't convinced. Anecdotal evidence, Your Majesty, we need systematic data, not heartwarming stories. Fine, let's talk systematically. The Queen's voice took on a harder edge. During my time here, I worked with Earth's diplomatic corps on the treaty. Those negotiations were brutal. Every clause was fought over, every word mattered. And do you know what I noticed? She didn't wait for an answer. Human negotiators fought hard for their interests, yes, but they also fought for fairness, for balance, for agreements that would benefit both sides. They could have exploited their position. We needed them more than they needed us at that time. But they didn't. They built a treaty designed to last, not to maximize short-term gain. The first advisor shifted uncomfortably. That was then, Your Majesty. Times have changed. Have they? David, how is the embassy funded now? David cleared his throat nervously. It's tight. Government reduced the budget by 70% after most aliens left. But there's also donations. A lot of local businesses and citizens contribute to keep it running. They believe in what this place represents, even though there's no practical benefit anymore. Donations, the Queen repeated. Citizens spending their own money to maintain a building that serves no immediate purpose because they believe in the idea of interstellar cooperation. She looked at her advisors. Still think humans don't value this alliance? The woman advisor tried another approach. Your Majesty, even if we accept your argument about Earth's character, their technological limitations remain. They can't defend themselves adequately. They have limited resources to offer in trade. The practical challenges haven't changed. But potential has, the Queen said. Every species starts somewhere. We were once where Earth is now, newly aware of the larger universe, struggling to find our place. We had allies who invested in our potential rather than our immediate output. They saw something worth nurturing. She walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out over the sleeping city. The war taught me something. Do you know what the difference was between our allies who stood with us and those who abandoned us? It wasn't military strength or economic power. It was reliability, trust, the certainty that when things got difficult, they wouldn't walk away. The Queen turned back. Earth had 7 years to forget about us, to move on, to decide this alliance was more trouble than it was worth. But instead, they maintained our embassy, preserved our gardens, kept our history alive. Citizens donated money. Workers like David spent years maintaining spaces for aliens who might never return. That's the data you're missing. That's what your projections can't measure. You're analyzing Earth's current output while ignoring their demonstrated character. And character, my advisors, is what matters when choosing partners for the long term. The second advisor, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Your Majesty, even if we accept your assessment, the Council won't be swayed by philosophy. They'll want concrete reasons to continue this alliance. Then we'll give them concrete reasons. The Queen's voice was firm. But first I need you all to do something. Stop looking at Earth through data reports and start looking at it directly. Talk to the humans who work here. Visit their cities. See what they've built and how they treat each other. Then tell me if this is a species worth investing in. The advisors didn't look happy, but they couldn't argue with a direct order from their queen. After some tense discussion in their language, they agreed to extend the assessment period. They'd do a proper survey of Earth, not just analyze numbers. After they left, the queen sank onto the bench looking exhausted. David sat beside her cautiously. "Will that help?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "My advisors are good people, but they think in terms of resources and efficiency. They've forgotten that alliances are built on more than spreadsheets." David was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I think you're right. About the character thing. I mean, I don't know anything about galactic politics, but I know people. And I know the folks who work here who kept this place going when it would have been easier to let it fall apart. They did it because they believed it mattered." The Queen smiled sadly. "The problem is, I have to convince the Council of that, and they're even more focused on data than my advisors. They'll want proof that Earth deserves continued partnership, proof that you're worth the investment." "What kind of proof?" "I don't know. Something that demonstrates Earth's value beyond current capabilities, something that shows your potential as partners." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Preferably something measurable, since apparently that's all that counts." They sat in silence, watching the moonflowers pulse gently in the darkness. David thought about everything the Queen had said. About being measured and found wanting. About potential versus current output. About how hard it was to prove that caring and character mattered in a universe that ran on numbers. He thought about his mother working 3 jobs so he could go to school. About Professor Liu spending months helping him with plants for no reason except it was the right thing to do. About Jake from maintenance and the garden store owner and all the other people who helped simply because they could. "You know what I think?" David said finally. "I think your advisors are asking the wrong question." The Queen looked at him. "What do you mean?" "They're asking if Earth is worth investing in, like we're a stock or something. But that's not how partnerships work. Real partnerships aren't about one side being worth it to the other. They're about both sides making each other better." David leaned forward, trying to put his thoughts into words. "You came to Earth 7 years ago because you saw something here. Something that made you think we could be good partners. And from what you've told me, Earth changed because of that. We learned about the